Hi, I'm Anna Robb, and I'm going to be going over your brain map with you, either here in just a little while or in an upcoming appointment. And what I'd like to do now is explain to you the facets of the brain map so that you have a good understanding of what it is that we're looking at, what it is that we're able to read, so that by the time you and I sit down, you have a really good understanding of what it is and what it shows and the different dynamics, and then I will boil it down for you very uniquely and personally in terms of what your brain map says about you, okay? So this is basically an introduction to the brain map. The assessment process has several parts to it. At this point, you will have probably have met with me, and we've gone over your questions in detail and your symptoms in detail, and that helps give me what I call my baseline assessment, looking very specifically at the symptoms that have brought you in and very specifically at what our goals are for you. In that vein, we also want to hear from you specifically in terms of the assessments that we have you do online. Those assessments are very helpful because they really boil down the little parts, the little nuances of what you're dealing with. So when you go online and you do your assessments, there's two assessments that you will have done, your CEC and the ISI. So what the CEC shows, this CEC response, okay, it shows where you've answered ones, twos, or threes. So ones are low, twos are medium, and threes are high. And what it does is it gives me a composite score up at the top. It shows me these black lines where the normative line is, and the red is anywhere that you have scored yourself above the line. So for instance, this person who's anonymous, they scored themselves quite high with memory issues and impulsivity. The map also gives us a predictive analysis. So this is not the actual brain map, but it is a predictor of areas that may be most likely to be dysregulated based on the answers that you give. So this is a very helpful tool. It serves as our baseline assessment from your perspective. So you will be doing this again at 20 sessions or at each increment when we reassess you. So that we'll have a before and after of your personal assessments, and we'll also have a before and after of your brain map assessments. Another thing to point out about the CEC is the software will import this information onto the brain map to give us a side-by-side comparison, and I will tell you more about that in just a minute. The second assessment that we have you do online is called the ISI. That's the interactive self-inventory. A lot of times this inventory tends to pull out mood issues more thoroughly than the CEC, the cognitive emotional checklist. It also has a host of other issues or aspects of personality where you can see the blue is the individual, that's how they're scoring themselves. The red is the normative line, and then the purple is for the peak performers, okay? So people who are considered peak performers in their field. It just gives us some scale all the way around. There are a lot of different aspects on this inventory. A lot of times I'm honing in on the mood. A lot of times this particular inventory will bring out impulse control issues or avoidance or dependence. At the end of the day, it's one more way that I can get familiar with each individual as they see themselves. So both assessments together give me a really good overview of your subjective analysis of yourself. And so you are scoring these with numbers, you're rating them. You're going to do this again after each set of 20 sessions, and we'll be comparing the numbers. So we've got the numbers, we've got the checklist and the assessments, and we also have our very valuable technicians that we hope that you will communicate with as much as possible so that we can really assist you in your journey thoroughly and completely with a highly unique approach. In this video, I want to go over the brain map in detail. I want to be able to give you a good understanding of what it is that we're going to be looking for and what we can see in the brain map before I meet with you. So it does have a little bit of a burden of explanation to give because I want people to understand. The BrainMap offers some tools to break it down and make it easier. But in particular, this BrainMap, this system, shows me at first what we call the dashboard. So the dashboard is a statistical summary. The first 2 pages of the BrainMap you'll see they literally give you what looks like a little dashboard, and then we have these lights down here that correspond with different symptoms. One thing that I think is interesting and that I like about the BrainMap is it imports the CEC, the Cognitive Emotional Checklist, which is this inventory here. It imports the numbers from here onto the BrainMap, and you see it says under the CEC line. So where you have put 1, 2s, or 3s, lows, moderate, or high, it shows that here. And then where the EEG then comes in and says, okay, based on your electrical activity, based on your age and gender and location of the brain, we're going to give you a predictor here. We're going to give you a light. Now this is very important to understand. This is not a diagnosis. It's a probability legend. It is based on statistics. So we have a low, moderate, or high probability that you may be dealing with one of these issues. As we go over, this particular category is called under-arousal. There's a lot I could say. I'm going to try to keep this condensed. It just gives an overall dashboard number, and then the local measures down here. What that means is that means based on specific areas of the brain, it will give you a light. Okay, so it is a helpful little dashboard that gives us some direction. It's not perfect, but it is helpful and it is worth sharing. The other thing I like to point out is that sometimes these don't match, and that's okay. In fact, a lot of times when people see the EEG scores are like, that's actually more accurate than what I put. But just so you understand, we don't expect them to match perfectly. This category is the inhibited category. It has more to do with depressive features. It also gives a dashboard measure, and this dashboard in particular has to do with what we call alpha asymmetry. There's a lot to explain here, a lot that I could go into detail, but the overall alpha asymmetry is reflected here, and then again the local measures are reflected here. Okay, so the person may have high probability for things like irritability or anger or rumination that fall into a depressive category. A lot of people are struggling with depressive symptoms. They don't realize it, especially in men and in children. Irritability or anger may be the first thing you see before you see anything that you would ever think of calling depression. So this category has to do with those heavier depressive features. The category of overarousal is more anxious features. This dashboard connects to beta asymmetry and beta dominance. That too is a lot to explain, but that's where these dashboards come from. And just because there's green lights here, it doesn't mean that if worry and hypervigilance are high or moderate, that all of these may not be fair game as well. There also clearly are a lot of other factors that play into anxiety and anxious symptoms. The second page of the dashboard includes more cognitive features. What I really like to point out to people is this page does not reflect your potential, your IQ. This page reflects the traffic. Okay, it's like a traffic map. So you can be very intelligent and not score well on these because there's based on what your electrical activity is doing in your brain. Basically, what the different features on this section of the map are, we have executive processing, which very much has to do with what's happening in the frontal lobe. These are very much attention-oriented features. The second feature of this is memory processing. Memory processing is another feature, and this person is really feeling like they're having a struggle, and it is showing all the different types of memory, procedural, sequential, short-term, working, that there is a fair amount of pushback there. And the great news is with neurofeedback, we fully expect to help them with these issues. Down here we have verbal processing and visual processing. Interestingly enough, verbal processing is something that people tend to notice when I bring it up to them in relationships, and they usually have a snicker, especially if it's between couples, you know, sitting across from each other. Our brain is in charge of how well we understand each other. So sometimes when we get frustrated, we need to understand that even though we think that we are seeing everything completely accurately, sometimes we are in fact not. Visual processing is a huge part of what we rely on in our brain to help us on a daily basis with everything. If there's impedance there, that's just one more issue that makes processing difficult. So one of the metaphors I use very often is like a treadmill incline, okay? So when you have processing deficits or you have impedance in the signal, it's like living life on an incline. Somebody with really significant executive processing deficits almost will always end up with depression and anxiety as well as some kind of an attention issue, because this incline eventually becomes very exhausting. So I use the metaphor of that incline because each of these things that's pushing back on this person creates more and more and more resistance. Our job is to lower the resistance. So anytime we improve the processing, we lower the resistance of those signals getting through, your brain becomes an easier place to live. The other two here are reading comprehension and math comprehension. Sometimes these are executive processing deficits, and sometimes they're really organically based in those areas of the brain. And we can see that as well. This is actually kind of what I would call the cheat sheet, based on just statistical measures for age and gender and location of the brain. This page gives us the theta to beta ratio, and it also gives us what's called a midline analysis. Early in the field of neurofeedback, we began to understand that the ratio of theta activity to beta activity is a very high correlation with attention deficits. So even though this is not intended to be a diagnostic tool, we can definitely see on the BrainMap, and I can definitely show what the probability is that there are attention deficits based on the brainwave activity. Below, we have what's called the midline analysis, and that analysis gives us a little bit of scale in terms of seeing how much, because it's going through the midline of the brain. It goes through the frontal, central, parietal, and occipital areas, and it shows us what's happening with delta, theta, alpha, and beta. Sometimes looking at this page and seeing that gives us a little bit of depth of, okay, it's high, but how high? Or it's low, how low, okay? So we can see both ends of that from the midline analysis. As you know, during the BrainMap, we recorded 5 minutes with eyes opened and 5 minutes with eyes closed. During your BrainMap analysis, I'm going to be going over the majority of that with eyes opened. The eyes closed is very important. It is definitely the hub of the analysis, but the eyes open shows the extra strain of what happens when there's visual processing. So we do see that we have the eyes closed and the eyes open version. They both show the same thing, but as you can see, the eyes open usually looks more exaggerated. Like I said, because of the visual processing demand in the brain, it tends to really highlight and exaggerate the issues. This is the magnitude portion of the eyes closed map. So what this shows us is from very slow to very fast activity. We have delta, theta, alpha, beta, and high beta. Each type of activity has a function in the brain, and each type of activity is operating all the time. The gray is normal. In this case, the blue is low. The dark blue is very low. The red is high, and the yellow is very high. Okay, so we can already see some dynamics popping up here. So with delta activity, delta is the type of activity that is most prominent in sleep. The issue is that when you have too much during your waking state, it literally bogs down the system. There is a function for delta activity, but in excess, it's like too many slow cars on the highway. It's just the signal's not going to get through properly. So theta is also another slow activity. If you remember, the theta to beta ratio is a high predictor for attention deficit disorder. If you have too much theta and not enough beta, you're very likely going to have executive processing deficits, okay? Theta, by nature, however, governs memory and emotion. So if you have dysregulation in theta, you're going to notice memory dysregulation, you're going to have emotional dysregulation, and when it's in excess, especially in the frontal lobe, you're probably going to have focus and attention issues, okay? So moving on to alpha activity. Alpha activity is definitely our friend, but too much is not better. Alpha is the hum of the brain. It's the relaxed state of the brain. It's where our brain goes to rest. So literally the brain is constantly going towards this alpha state, and then it'll move and do what it needs to do, but alpha is the neutral. It's the home base, okay? So too much alpha activity is going to become depressive. And it also is a flagship for whether or not that person has been under chronic stress, okay? So if they have excessive amounts of alpha. Not having enough alpha activity will invariably cause issues with troubles with transitioning, troubles calming down, troubles trying to go to sleep, to power down, because as you're going to sleep, you're literally powering down through these different frequencies. And so alpha it's like the hinge of the seesaw. So moving on to beta activity. Beta, we have beta and high beta. Those are faster processing speeds. Those are fast frequencies. They are the relayers of information. And so we want them to be healthy. If they're too low, as in the case of this person, they're going to have trouble with transmission of information. Okay. So when you have too much beta, that is going to cause busy brain. So we have too much, we can get very anxious, overwhelmed symptoms. We have too little, then we have under-arousal, and our processing suffers, okay? So you can see this, and I'm going to show you how it compares to the eyes open, the same version. So here we see we have some of these issues cropping up, but when we flip over to the eyes open version, we see it's more dramatic, okay? So whereas before there was a little bit of these signs flaring up, now, oh my goodness. So it's the same dynamic, but it's more exaggerated, and because we live our lives in large with our eyes open, it's very important to know what's happening and how that affects us. So in your map review, I will largely be going over the eyes open dynamic. Like I said, because we are going to be training with eyes opened, and because you live with your eyes open, okay, it will help you understand that. So the map gives us portions that I kind of call the cheat sheet portions. So what it gives us down here, and I'll be showing you in your map if any of this is an issue, when it gives dominant frequency issues. So if you have high dominant frequency or low dominant frequency, alpha or beta, that can subscribe specific meaning. Down here we have interconnectivity. So that is the relationship between hemispheres. Also asymmetry is something I mentioned, and asymmetry is left and right hemisphere dominance, specifically of alpha and beta. And I will describe more what that means here on the next page. So the map shows us the magnitude, and it shows us with one version that is more like a spectrum, and then one version that is really graded more on the 10/20 system. It's actually the same. So I'll be showing you this, and I really like that because I do like that graded picture. It shows the contrast, and it shows the global image a little better. But then when we turn the page, we get the same information, but we get the 10/20 system, okay? So the 10/20 system is that's the location system. So that's how we know where each placement is on the scalp. It's how your brain is measured through the EEG cap. All of the holes, those are all designated towards a certain specific place on the scalp, on the brain, and that's what we call the 10-20 system. So they look like little circles, and that is very helpful because then it's very pinpointed. So as we already talked about this person's map in particular, they're having some struggles with some excessively high slow wave activity. What that means is there's too much amplitude of those slow waves, which are going to get in the way of the faster processing speeds. So there are multiple reasons and ways that excessive slowing can happen, but what we want to remember is that gets in the way of our processing, okay? But I also wanted to show you a map that has a different image that is very common, where somebody may have high or very high beta, okay? So this person's issue, and you can see their brain is trying to put the brakes on, this very high beta, that is going to cause a sense of being overwhelmed, ruminating, not being able to stop certain trains of thought. That is a very real issue when you have high magnitude beta, which is a very common problem. But I also want you to see, like with this person, you can have very highs and very lows. And that's what can make medication management very complex, is because when you give someone a medication, we can't say just go to this area of the brain and don't go to this area of the brain. But it does show why medication management can be so tricky for doctors, because without a guided map or without some extra information, they're really a lot of times hoping for the best in terms of lack of side effects. I mentioned on the other page, dominant frequency is one of the things that are measured. Dominant frequency, think of it like the idling speed of the wave. Idling speed in the faster waves like the beta frequencies, if it's idling fast, then guess what? It starts to feel like a revved up engine. And people literally like, oh my gosh, yes, that's exactly what it feels like. I mean, yes, because that's what your brain is doing. It's like you feel chronically like hyper aroused, like you're trying to just keep things calm. And that's very much what it feels like when you have high dominant frequency beta. There is a lot of information on the BrainMap. And as I mentioned, I love information. I love data. I don't want to overwhelm people, but I try to do things the way that I would want them done. And so I would want to understand my brain map as much as I could. And so I do seek to try to help people understand what I'm seeing. So as we continue on in the brain map, as I mentioned, it also shows the amount of connectivity. We can have too much connectedness or not enough connectedness between hemispheres in each type of wavelength. Too much connection, for instance, this can be correlated with seizure disorder, especially where you have excessive delta connectivity. So that's an example of something that can happen when that connection is too tight. When there's not enough, again, that can really just press in on the lack of communication between hemispheres, can add to additional issues with processing. The last page of the brain map shows what's called asymmetry. Asymmetry is understood to be very important, especially as it regards beta and alpha activity. We really want alpha activity to dominate the right hemisphere, and we want beta activity to dominate the left hemisphere. And there's very good reason for this. The right hemisphere is our bit slower, more creative, emotional hemisphere. The left hemisphere is our more calculating and analytical, direct hemisphere, and we want beta activity to dominate that left hemisphere. We want that faster processing speed to dominate the left. We want that slower, hum, relaxed state to dominate the right. When we get that crisscrossed, which happens very often, then we get the opposite. We get alpha activity in the left hemisphere. We start to get depression, especially when it's in the left frontal part of the brain. We get beta activity in the right hemisphere. We get anxiety, because then we have this faster frequency activity that's really rattling the cage of the right hemisphere that really wants to be more relaxed and more fluid. So when we get those backwards, we can very easily pinpoint to a very high chance for either depression or anxiety or both. So that's one of the aspects that we are included when we are training with neurofeedback. This page of the map gives suggested protocols. So what it does is it gives a strictly statistical suggestion for protocol placements, meaning where we place the leads during your treatment. I am taking these suggestions into account, and I'm looking at your map with my clinical eyes. I'm looking at your map through the symptoms that you're having, and I'm also looking in your map with the years and years of experience I have combining the 4 locations, how they work together to work on a myriad of symptoms at one time. That is why my clinical analysis of the map is so very important. It certainly helps to see the dysregulation based on statistics alone, but there's absolutely nothing that replaces the human element of being able to see how these placements drastically affect the efficiency and the effectiveness of training, especially when we are looking at regulating numerous issues at the same time. So please make sure as well that during your training process you're communicating with us as much as possible, because there are certainly times when I can make a small placement change that will make it can make a huge difference in your progress, just because making that tweak or change based on your feedback really can make all the difference. So the next time we see you, we will be going over your brain map with you. You have all of the elements of the brain map now, you understand it, and we will be able to sit down with you and go over the specific signatures of your map and help you understand how that pertains to you specifically, and help you understand what our approach is going to be for your treatment, as we have a very highly unique, very specialized approach to each individual who comes into our practice. It is our highest quality commitment to make sure that each person who comes to our practice gets what they come for, and we are truly dedicated to healing.